infrastructure to facilitate and control secure data sharing across, not just for open data, but for all kinds of data sets, including data sets where people won't share them unless they know who they're sharing them with and for what purposes. And in some cases, at what cost, because some data will be chargeable. So it's about the data trusts, the data marks, but also the data passports, for that. And then, really it's on to the importance of the standards that, need to underpin that. So things like the data ontologies, the data dictionaries, so that we can join up these data sets to drive insights. If we had more data, we could have done more interesting things in this pandemic with AI and machine learning at a national scale. But I suppose one of the areas I'm most interested in is feeding these data into digital twins or digital models, because I think that's probably one of the most exciting applications of AI, is when you start connecting those models to virtual worlds and letting them come up with optimizations that humans would struggle to come up with.
I think digital twins are really interesting, particularly where I look at the work in research organizations, and a lot of the research and findings sort of stay in a sandbox, right? But it's historically then difficult to then transfer that research into the real world without being able to map the real world implications. Mark, Vishal, Paul, this is open to all of you. Like, how can we take the best of research, whether it's internal in your departments, in your organizations, and take it into the real world and being responsible with it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and perhaps bring in some of your experiences around it.
Yep. So I guess one of the things with the applied side of research and AI is what we have experienced is, for AI and machine learning to be useful, domain knowledge is very, very important. So no matter what research that we do as independent technology companies or in academia, to go beyond toy problems to real world applications, really kind of half of the capability or the fact would be that we have to absolutely understand the domain. And what we had the benefit of in working with Kuehne+Nagel was really have the opportunity to work very closely with people like Mark, trade managers who actually manage the business of trying to allocate capacity onto the chips. Without that, it's very hard, or I can go so far as to say impossible to derive value, because it's a great collection of tools, but the applicability of the tools requires a lot of work with actual humans. And we also saw that in the other domains that we work on. So the time to value can be sort of accelerated by years if we have good domain expertise. Yeah.
Mark, we talked a lot about keeping humans in the loop and using AI-enabled technologies to help decision-making, particularly in your organization. I wonder if you can talk about that side of things for our audience.
Yeah, sure. So one of the the key motivating factor from us with our involvement with AI comes from gaining transparency of the key supply chain trade-offs. So we need to constantly strike that balance between cost and performance. And this is why we employ the experts that we do to deliver that value to our customers. So our focus is very much looking at making good decisions systematically. And we believe that the best way to do that is to combine the human intelligence, the human expertise that have got us to this point with the machine intelligence, both at the strategic, tactical, and the operational level. Now, actually, whilst we were proceeding through this AI journey that we're on, and specifically talking about the customer demand prediction, we made progress, and then the pandemic hit, and it was quite incredible how quickly we had to pivot, because suddenly when you're looking at historic data, as one of the key data sources to predict the future, suddenly that entire model had been ripped up in front of our noses. So the pivot then was, well, what available data sources are there that can help us deal with this changing situation that's moving from making significant shifts from a day-to-day point of view, or even hour to hour. And we got to the stage where we said, well, actually one of our most valuable and rich data sources are actually the human knowledge of real-time events that are going on right now in our environment that are being consumed by all of our experts around the world. So that's where we started to really focus on meshing together this underlying AI model with human expertise as a data source. And I'll give you an example of some of these inputs. So of course, there could be a factory closure in Taiwan. That means that demand or orders will shift geographically. And when you're talking about a demand forecast, no matter how good you are extracting historic data, that historic data will not be able to show you that exceptional event in real time. So yes, we're looking at ensuring that real-time feed of information can reach the AI model and positively impact the outcome that we're looking for.
Fantastic. Paul, do you want to maybe jump in there with maybe some of your experiences during this time?
Well, maybe to come back to your previous question about how you manage that kind of flow, that research, that flow from research through into production. I suppose what we do is we have a series of compartments. They're not watertight because ideas and technologies and talent flow across them. But they are somewhat ring fenced, so that within those different compartments we focus on different kind of risk, technology, and innovation kind of time horizons, if you like. And a lot of the core innovation happens in our big engineering teams that are building our Ocado Smart platform, which we sell around the world. But then there's business sponsored research in robotics and AI and simulation and things like that. And then outside that, then you kind of get into my division, which is focused on the more forward-facing stuff, what you referred to earlier as the self-disruption, self-reinvention kind of agenda. But there is a flow there, and of course you have to have different ways of working and use different tools potentially, and technologies and have a different culture to drive it in those different areas. But of course, what you're trying to do is flow research through. But as we all know, when things go into production, you have to worry all about the resilience and redundancy and the plumbing and the monitoring and all of that, which has to be built in as part of the hardening process along that pipeline. I suppose that's kind of how we manage it. And I suppose one other thing that you mentioned earlier about making sure that you approach that responsibly. I think the key thing there is obviously remaining very focused on the end customer, and whether that be a B2B customer or whether that be the B2C customer, and obviously always keeping them in mind, particularly when it comes to the underlying data that's driving all of this.
Vishal, did you have anything to add there?
No, I think all those points are very well made. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting when we talk about standardization as well. When we're looking at a particular application, not all AI is the same. And to get meaningful practical guidelines for AI and use cases, we have to really think about the perspective of all of that and bringing together industries and sectors to really contribute to that discussion. And I guess in a way, we're sort of doing that today with sort of supply chain, but it is on a kind of like use by use cases. And And I think you've really drawn on some really powerful themes that have come through your experiences during COVID. But I'd really love to know a little bit more from Vishal about how, growing companies such as Secondmind can really support people across different sectors, particularly where you've seen how standards have been put into the telecoms industry, for instance.
Yeah, thanks for that. So before I talk about standards in this, or the need for standards in the supply chain side, I'll give you an analog from my experience in the mobile internet space. So having started in that industry in the 1990s, I still remember being in Singapore. When I used to go to Japan, I used to rent a mobile phone, and there was no way to even send a text through that mobile phone to my family in Singapore to tell where I was. So I had to call all my colleagues to tell them where I was, because there was no interoperability between text messages. Similarly, I went to San Diego, I rented a different phone. I went to New York, I rented a different phone, and so on and so forth. So this lack of interoperability was because of lack of standards. But as of today, what we see ourselves is, from that period in 1990, from 2020, trillions of dollars of value has been created through the act of standardization, by which data schemas around how data is transmitted, the underlying layers is there, so that seamlessly, if I take a photograph on my iPhone, I can send it to Slack, pull it out of Slack, put it on WhatsApp, put it on my email, and my photograph or anything does not lose value. So there is seamless heart of information. At the same time, it is also secure. Now, when I look at the world of supply chain, while fantastic work is going on within companies, and thanks to efforts like Ocado now, when they are licensing technology also across, the work is still happening. What I would describe as basically islands, how things were in the 1990s with the mobile industry. One practical example of that is a challenge where right now I'm wearing a blue shirt, and if I was to order this blue shirt from an online retailer, if it was out of stock, there was no way for the person making the blue shirt in Bangladesh or in China to know it is out of stock, or it's about to be out of stock based on the ordering. So to proactively start ordering the materials, because the information between a Sports Direct to a Nike and all the people in between is not really shared, right? Because and even if the information was shared, everybody has their unique way to call a blue shirt, right? Whereas in the mobile industry, if you look at one character, say if I have to put the number 2 in Arial font, because of Unicode, that notion of 2 in that particular font and in that font size is standardized. So no matter which browser or which device I use to access it, it always looks the same. Now, if you were able to standardize an element of that across the data schema, then we would improve the efficiency, not just of information flow, but also of data loss. Because the other problem we have is what people like to describe as dirty data or unclean data that needs to be cleansed. And as a result of that, we have another industry called the ETL industry, where all of us spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year trying to cleanse data, extract, transform, and load, which simply should not be there, right? So in the mobile world, I have nobody transliterating and reformatting my photograph as I move it from my camera to Slack to WhatsApp. So we need to have a similar analog of that within supply chain. Is it easy? No, but we need to get started.
This is it. I'm conscious of time, and I know that we will be going into a Q&A hopefully for about 10-15 minutes when the session ends. But I'd love to know, just as we sort of close, from each of you, who would you like to take lead in creating the standards that we need? Is it something that goes across technology companies, governments, associations, standards organizations? How do we bring everyone together? And Paul, I know the work you're doing in the AI Council is fantastic, chaired by Tabitha. Where else do you see gaps? I mean, if I come to each of you very quickly, then we can continue the conversation in the Q&A with our audience.
Well, I think it's very much about a partnership. It's a partnership between, all of the different sectors, actually, private, public, NGOs, and rest of the civil society, and indeed government, in that, because although it's about, the kind of schema ontology type standards that Vishal's just been talking about, it's also very much around security and privacy and ethics, and trust. And so there's a lot to do there, as part of that standardization process. And it can only be, done, through effective partnership. And as you say, that's the agenda in part of groups like the AI Council, but there are plenty of other, stakeholders engaged in that drive for standardization, and hopefully, to build the enabling infrastructure that can help us do all sorts of, more exciting things in the future.
Fantastic. Mark, if I come to you next.
Yeah, sure. So it's difficult to argue against what Paul has just said there. The only thing I would add is, from a practical point of view, the value has to be front and center. It has to be customer centric, and we have to understand exactly what value is there to be achieved. Because to move from a theoretical partnership to something that's practical, that really makes a difference across industries, it starts and ends with what is the opportunity. And I think we can look at ourselves at this moment in time that maybe we need to spend more time on defining, out of AI, what is that value that can be delivered to the whole. And I would like the discussion to start there.
Fantastic, thank you. Vishal, any final comments?
No, I completely agree with Mark and Paul. I think value has to come first, and also as Paul mentioned, it's a collaborative effort. In the world of GSM standardization, we have the governments, the technology providers, and the technology users all come together and start working on the standards. And having participated in some of those standards in the late 90s, early 2000s, I can tell you it was maybe just slightly less painful than going to the dentist, but now looking back, it was worth it.
Yeah, I think underlining everything is a word, Paul, that you first used, and it's ethics, and really it's knowing the unknowns and knowing where to find those unknowns, and including people in the conversation where we don't know those knowns. I hope that's not too much of a riddle and too wordy, but I'd like to just take this opportunity to thank Vishal, Paul, and Mark. We'll be in the Q&A for a quick 10 to 15 minutes, so we'll hope you'll join us there. And I'm going to hand back over to lovely Amelia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. That was a really great, informative panel. Really appreciate it. And I love the points that you made about collaboration, partnership, how we can actually team together to fill in some of these gaps and work with each other to solve some of these challenges that we're all facing at the moment. So if you have questions for the panel, please head over to the link that is in your chat session. And then also don't forget to join our conversation in the WhatsApp group by going on to sessions and scan the QR barcode, or you can just click the link in the lounge. We also have the one-to-one networking opened up, as well as cyberspace. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back at 5 past. See you then.